Going to look real quickly today through the book of Lamentations. Wow. It's not one we often refer to in our studies. Lamentations is this interesting place in the context of the Old Testament where it seems like nothing is any good. It's really it's a tough read. And when we think about all of the stuff that went on back in this time frame, we see Solomon's temple has been destroyed. It's been leveled. We see that the king's palace is all gone. All the houses that the people lived in were destroyed. The important buildings that had rich history were all decimated. And the reality for all of this is that the hope of Jerusalem was lying in the midst of all this rubble when the nation of Israel had been able to come back for 70-year visitation into Babylon. You know, when the Lord talked to King Cyrus of Persia and told him, send the people back so that they can rebuild their city. God touched Cyrus's life. That's why Cyrus in Hebrew means God's chosen. So here we see this all as a backdrop to what's going on. And the sense of what Jesus would say that would happen again, that we read from Matthew, is the reality that it's not the last time Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. It's been done 3 other times. Destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt. Now it's rebuilt, kinda. Because every day, hundreds of rockets and missiles are landing around it, and we don't know what the end's going to be of all that. But what we do know is that Jeremiah, who we talked about 2 weeks ago, was in this position to where he was a witness to all this stuff. And when we think about all the things that went on with those major prophets, Ezra, Nehemiah, Jeremiah, the fact is that we can consider Jeremiah to be the weeping prophet. The weeping prophet. His warning message was basically ignored by the people for so long. He became abused and beaten and imprisoned and all manner of things just because he was telling the people what God wanted him to say. And the king at the time didn't like that, so he's put into this bad place. He kind of takes the anguish of the people and their tears to heart. And he's crying not just for the people, he's crying for Jerusalem. The feminine that we see referred to so much in these prophetic writings. Her, she, talking about Jerusalem. Lamentations in the 1st chapter in verses 1 and 2. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. It was full of people. How lonely it sits. She has become like a widow who was once great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become a forced laborer. In the Hebrew, the way this is written, the implication is she was once the master of all these things, now she's a slave. Tables have turned. Jerusalem from here to there. Verse 2, first part of it says, she weeps bitterly in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. She has none to comfort her. Wow. The prophet has declared in these writings that city's doom is something that had been declared way before time. Everybody of that day would have heard at some point in time from one of the prophets exactly what happened and exactly why it's in the condition it's in. It's one of those moments in time where we see the prophet lamenting Lamentations, lamenting, feeling the pain of these people who have lost the glory of Israel. All of a sudden, they just don't recognize the reality of what they had and what they're a part of. In his cry to the Lord, he recognizes this stubbornness that's going on. Matthew 23, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Imagine that. This is Jesus talking, who kills the prophets, stone those who sent to her. This is what happened to so many of the prophets. They were beaten, they were scourged, they were imprisoned, they were ushered out of town. We would say, send them out of town on the rail. Here they are, they're doing their job that God called them to do. And at the end of the day, they're getting wham, bang, beaten up, all because they're doing exactly what God instructed them to do. But they believe and they understand it's a temporary situation. It's like anybody that's talked to God, and these folks literally talked to God, they knew what tomorrow held. They didn't worry about today or yesterday. They worried about tomorrow, and they maintained their position with him. How often I wanted to gather your children together, meaning all the people of Jerusalem, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. In other words, the people in Jerusalem were like, I don't want to hear it, God. Leave me alone. Put the prophet in jail. We don't like what he's saying. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. And that's exactly what happened. It was decimated. And based on the people's tragic choices, we see exactly how the prophet had declared exactly what was going on. Nothing untrue about that. And because of the nature of this writing, Lamentations, lamenting, Lamentations is called perhaps the saddest book in the Bible. The saddest book in the Bible. It contains some of the best known passages, but some commentators have called Lamentations the funeral service of Israel because of exactly all the things that went on. And it's a picture of the death of a city and the change of a people from being godly to being the antithesis of that, the opposite, totally antithetical to what the Lord would have them to do. And when we think about Jeremiah's sorrow, and incidentally, we don't know specifically if Jeremiah wrote Lamentations. What we do know is book, chapter, and verse, the way he puts everything together is mirrored in Lamentations from his writings in Jeremiah. So there's no evidence that he actually penned it, but the style and the content methodology is pretty much letting us know that it really was Jeremiah. And it was in the same time frame. So we see him in this point grieving over all of this, and he understood the background. He understood how everything was going to unfold. He had a preview of all the things that were going to happen. And it's proper for us to understand that when we think of Lamentations and we think of lamenting and the sadness that it involves, the Hebrew words that are used to make up this, it's a compound word, but the Hebrew words that are used are one ekah, E-K-A-H, ekah, which means basically alas. That would be an exclamation. Alas. And then the rest of the word is, Q-I-N-O-T, which you put those two together, and that means dirges or laments. So he's saying, look, see, alas, there are laments here. There is sadness here. There is sorrow here. That's the makeup of the name. And that basically was put together at the time of Jerome. Jerome translated the Hebrew into Latin. It's called the Vulgate. Back in the early Christian era. And when he did that, he was the one that discovered the compound nature of what was going on there, the lamenting of Jerusalem because of Jeremiah. So it was put together in the same time frame as Jeremiah's prophetic words. We know that it's a significant undertaking to put into chronological order all the events that happen at any time. And chronological order is an important thing because it keeps the timeline of God's plan for the salvation of the Jews and Gentiles. Anybody here a Gentile? Every one of you is a Gentile, unless you were born into a Jewish family. But that's the reality of how all of this unfolds. It goes from Jerusalem and kings and good stuff to we've been taken into slavery into Babylon for 70 years and all this is going on, and we meet all these people in Babylon with Daniel and Esther and Ruth and all of the people that were significant. And all of a sudden, 70 years later, we're back in Jerusalem and they rebuild the walls. And that's a significant thing because it's the rebirth of the city. And the reality for how Jeremiah puts it all together is significant because it's his style of writing. It's a way that everything comes together thus and so. We know when some people are believable because things don't change. They're consistent in the way they offer stuff to us. Here's what we found in 2 Chronicles as a first indication about how Jeremiah can really be the author here. Then Jeremiah chanted a lament, and that's that Hebrew word, Q-I-N-O-T, that means to lament or to mourn, a dirge. A lament for Josiah. And all the male and female singers speak about Josiah in their lamentations to this day. And they made them an ordinance in Israel. Behold, they are also written in the Lamentations. In other words, the singers in the temple, after all this happened, would sing of all the events that happened in the time of Jeremiah. They would sing of all the events that happened in the time of the destruction and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And this is a crucial part of that structure that helps us to understand Jeremiah probably is the guy that wrote it and witnessed a lot of this firsthand. It's done in the form of an acrostic. The whole book of Jeremiah, the whole book of Lamentations mirrors a lot of this, where you take certain letters of the alphabet in the Hebrew alphabet, starting with A, Aleph, and you go all the way to the end of the alphabet. And then remember, if you didn't know, the Hebrew alphabet doesn't have vowels. It has sounds. Not like we have A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. Doesn't work in the Hebrew. They just don't. And the reality for how all this falls together is knowing that David in the Psalms and Solomon in the Proverbs, they wrote similarly, where they would have certain poems and things that would come to light. And here we see, specifically Lamentations, the whole book done pretty much as an acrostic, where it started with the first A in the alphabet of the Hebrews all the way to the end. And it made it possible for everyone to explore what we would consider to be the suffering of Israel. The suffering of Israel. So often we overlook the things that happened in Israel because we're just not taught it. That's one of the reasons why I thought it would be good to go through these series of the prophets prior to getting into Revelation. Because when we get to Revelation, our eyes are going to be opened to a lot of stuff, and it's going to be a long study, but we need to understand the backdrop of all the things that were going on when we consider the historical picture that was and is today Israel. As we're going to see in Ezekiel, when we get towards the end of Ezekiel, chapters 37, 38, 39, we're going to see Exactly what's happening today. You could just go to those chapters and you can read it and you'll see everything that's happening today, up to and including the bombing of the airport in Damascus, Syria, that just happened this last week. It's right there. I mean, go figure. Ezekiel was a pretty cool guy, so we're going to learn about him after the holidays. But the suffering that took place is complete in its nature and how everything falls together in the historical timeline. The different chapters that we find here in Lamentations will talk about people, then they will focus on situations involving the Lord proper, and then we'll see a response to how all of this affliction is going to alter the makeup of the people, the nation of Israel. There's a time that all of these different books of the Old Testament are read in Hebrew worship. There's a calendar that they use to make sure that at this holiday this is read, this holiday this is read, this holiday this is read. And so much of what goes on has been based on historical events. And Lamentations is no different. It comes to the Jewish people as a picture of ignoring what the prophet said one more time, because the nation of Israel ignored the prophets all the time, literally, and they paid the price. Every time they failed to follow God's direction, things did not go their way. And when we think about it from the perspective of a prophet, put yourself in Jeremiah's shoes. Here's this guy who knows exactly what's going to happen to these people. It's just like when you tell your kids, right? Don't put your finger in the socket. Don't. I told you. This is Jeremiah. He's telling the people of Israel, don't do this, do this, and everything will be okay. It started in Egypt with the Exodus. We're rescued, we're free, we make it to the Dead Sea, and there's the big Egyptian armies behind us, and the people going, we want to go back. At least we were safe and we had food. God opens up the Red Sea, the people walk across, everything's fine. They get into the wilderness. God, we're hungry. He provides manna every day. And then the people say, manna, manna, manna. I'm so sick of manna. I'd like to have some meat. Oh, you want some meat? Okay, how about I send in like 40 billion pigeons or doves, and there's all these birds coming. Not too many weeks later, I'm so sick of eating this bird meat. I'm thirsty. We don't have any water. Oh, okay. Moses, tap this rock. Out comes a spring, and they drink to their heart's desire. Ah, my stomach hurts. And it goes through this whole recycle. And the people could never just be satisfied. They get into the city, they get into the land of milk and honey, and they continue to disobey God. Don't marry those Canaanite women. Don't do that. I do. I have all these children now. You're not listening to what God said. All these things continue to unfold, and every time they disobey God, something happens bad. Don't worship idols of the Gentiles, of these people who worship the false idols. Don't do that. Well, I only got 2 of them in my house that I carved. This is the God of the harvest, and I thought this was my best God. This was the God of my carriage. Today we'd say Mustang, but this is the God of my carriage. And God is like, you guys, off to Babylon, 70 years. So anyhow, this all continues in this cycle where the people disobey, obey, disobey, obey. And we know that the reality for what is going on in Jeremiah's life is at times he feels like he is broken. And I don't mean just because he's despondent. I mean, he's physically broken. He's been put in stocks. He's been imprisoned. He's been tortured. And this whole reality puts us in a place where we can kind of like sit beside him and watch exactly what's taking place. We can sense the anguish in his heart and in his spirit because he is witnessing exactly what God would say was going to happen. Jeremiah 8:21. For the brokenness of the daughter of my people, I am broken. The daughter of his people is a reference to Jerusalem and the inhabitants. For the brokenness of the daughter of my people, I am broken. I mourn. Dismay, dismay has taken hold of me. He's really down in the dumps. And the reality for all of this leads us to what we would consider to be Jerusalem's desolation. The time has come. Lamentations 1:1, what did it say? How lonely sits the city. There we have it. I mean, Jerusalem, the city on the hill that lights up the world, the home place of the Lord God on earth. The city that was full of people, she has become like a widow who was once great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become a forced laborer, a slave. She weeps bitterly at night, and her tears are on her cheeks. She has none to comfort her. In other words, all the people in Jerusalem have basically disavowed anything that had anything to do with God. The temple is filled with the worship of false idols, with statuettes and things that are never supposed to be there. They sing songs and worship things. Harvest, sexuality, fertility, all of this stuff that's crazy. They have made that more important than God. She has none to comfort her among all her lovers. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. In other words, all the people that were thriving and rejoicing in Jerusalem now hate her. They hate the city. They don't want anything to do with the city. It's a part of what we would consider to be the ultimate separation from God and his creation. Verse 9, her uncleanness was in her skirts. She did not consider the future. This is talking about the inhabitants of Jerusalem who weren't thinking one iota about tomorrow. Eat, drink, and be merry, right? I think we've heard that before. For tomorrow, who knows what will happen? They didn't care about tomorrow. They were living for the day. They were in this place in their history and in their lives where what was important to them was what made them feel good. Wonder if that's anything like what's been going on in our country. Do whatever makes you feel good. Life will be fine. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's got enough problems of its own. Eat, drink, and be merry. It's what we see going on here. She has no comforter. Oh, Lord, see my affliction. The city is basically, if it could talk, is crying out to God, saying, I'm your holy city, and these people are just, man, they've run me into the ground. I have nothing good to say about what's going on here right now. It's knowing that this desolation, this suffering, and all the things that have been going on are just a part of everyday life in the life of a prophet who says, this is what's going to happen if you don't do this. And they don't do it, and this is what happens. You'll have to excuse me while I pick up my clicker. Okay. Verse 16, for these things I weep. The Hebrew word here for I weep is not like, it's a word that means unbridled emotion. In other words, really crying. He's expressing here that this is something that is crushing me to my heart. These things I weep, my eyes run down with water, because far from me is a comforter. There is no one to take care of Jerusalem. God has basically been ignored and deserted. One who restores my soul. My children are desolate, meaning the people who lived in Jerusalem are desolate because the enemy has prevailed. And the enemy here would be not just opposing military forces, it would be the ultimate enemy of God, which is Satan. He has prevailed. Verse 17, Zion stretches out her hands. There is no one to comfort her. In Jerusalem, in the old city, Mount Zion, the highest point in Jerusalem, is the home of God. That's where we find, if you visit Jerusalem, the place of the Last Supper is on Mount Zion. King David's tomb is on Mount Zion. Solomon is entombed on Mount Zion. This is the most significant point in the city, Mount Zion. Just sits high. There's a lot of churches there. But at this time, they're saying, there's no one to comfort her, meaning the whole city. The Lord has commanded concerning Jacob that the ones round about him should be his adversaries. Jerusalem has become an unclean thing among them. Wow. God is like, you're on your own, baby. And Jerusalem was a mess. Totally out of character for what would have been the greatest city in the then known world. Verse 21, they have heard that I groan. This is Jerusalem talking. There is no one to comfort me. All my enemies have heard of my calamity, and they are glad. Now, can't you just see the prophet telling the people this? Hey, your enemies are really happy because of what you're doing. And they're going, it's not my fault. No, this is just a really, really bad time. And the desolation continues. But guess what happens? We find the Lord get angry. I'm calling this anger part 1 because God is not in a happy place. He had basically allowed the people to be covered in a cloud of anger because of everything they've done that was totally against what God wanted done. Totally. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. I don't care what you say. Well, guess what? I'm not so happy right now. At this point in time, what has gone on? The city has been basically decimated. Chapter 2, verse 1. How the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with the cloud of his anger. Oof. He has cast from heaven to earth the glory of Israel and has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. How many difficult words or how many descriptive adjectives can the prophet come up with when this is being written? I mean, how mad can God get? How upset can he be? How the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with the cloud of his anger. Jump down to the bottom. His footstool in the day of his anger is a description that allows the prophet to express the fact that instead of worshiping with and around the whole city, God has just got to the point where he's like, I'm just going to kick back in my easy chair and I'm going to put my heel on Jerusalem. That's my footstool. He's basically had it. You ever get to that place in life where you try to get something corrected and try to get someone to mind or do the right thing and they keep opposing you and saying, I don't want to, I'm not going to. And you get to the point where you go, I've had it. Fortunately, that never happened in my life. Much. Verse 2, the Lord has swallowed up. He has not spared all the habitations of Jacob. That means all of the nation of Israel, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he has no concern about them right now. I've had it, In his wrath, he has thrown down the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. Remember Israel. Judah was the southern region. That included Jerusalem. Israel was the northern region. That was all the other 10 tribes. They were up there. But here we see Judah. He's fallen down his anger on the strongholds of Jerusalem. He has brought them down to the ground. Literally, all those stones, the walls, the city, the buildings, the homes, everything has been brought down to the ground. He has profaned the kingdom and its princes. In fierce anger, he has cut off all the strength of Israel. No blessings for Israel. None. Remember how they defeated all their enemies. God went ahead of them, or God was behind them. But in every case, they won. They never were defeated unless it was because they disobeyed God. As long as they were in God's good care, God's good graces, Israel never lost a fight. Here we see all this has been done. In fierce anger, he has cut off all the strength of Israel. He has drawn back his right hand from before the enemy, and he has burned in Jacob like a flaming fire, consuming round about. So in history past, he would go ahead of the armies of Israel and he would take care of business. They would live happily ever after. Now he's moved to the rear of the advancing Israeli army, so to speak, meaning the city of Jerusalem. He's got out of the way and let whatever happens, happens. It's just the reality that you're going to see all kinds of bad things happen. He has set his right hand like an adversary and slain all that were pleasant in the eye in the tent of the daughter of Zion. He has poured out his wrath like fire. This is kind of a prelude to what we would see happening during the tribulation. That 7-year time frame after the rapture. We won't be here, sorry. You won't be able to watch it on the news. But we'll be gone, and then for 3.5 years, there's a lot of peace and love and happiness. And then for 3.5 years, there's nothing but destruction of people, especially any that become believers. Off with their heads. And this is a picture of how all of this would take place. He has set his right hand like an adversary and slain all that were pleasant to the eye. In the tent of the daughter of Zion, that would be Jerusalem, he has poured out his wrath like fire. The Lord has become like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all its palaces. He has destroyed its strongholds and multiplied in the daughter of Judah mourning and moaning. This is not a very happy time. Lots of things are going on with all the people that made up the city of Jerusalem. And it's knowing because of that, that we have this picture that continues to be painted for us in the New Testament about exactly what happens when people revolt against the Lord, stay away from God, disdain God. Verse 6, and he has violently treated his tabernacle, meaning the actual temple, like a garden booth. He has destroyed his appointed meeting place. That would be the high altar in the temple, where the chief priest would go and make the sacrifices on the part of the people. It's gone. It's been leveled. The Lord has caused to be forgotten the appointed feast and Sabbath in Zion, and he has despised the king and priest in the indignation of his anger. In other words, the king of Judah and the high priest, they were the two most important people in the life of the city and of the nation. They were the ones that were in charge of all things. And basically he has said he despises them because what they had done was put idols in the temple. It's the reality of what was going on. Okay? Verse 7, the Lord has rejected his altar. He has abandoned his sanctuary. He's delivered it into the hands of the enemy. In other words, he allowed the opposing forces to just decimate everything that had to do with the temple. And this would have been the temple of Solomon after King David. So here we see all this is going on. They have made this noise in the house of the Lord as in the day of an appointed feast. Verse 8, the Lord determined to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion. He has stretched out a line. He has not restrained his hand from destroying, and he has caused rampart and wall to lament. They have languished together. That's a picture of the opposing enemies that were coming to destroy Israel, Jerusalem, the city, the country. A rampart would be a siege device that they would build up on the side of the wall, and then they could climb up and attack the city. Then they would bring down the wall. They would destroy everything. Exactly what happened. He has caused rampart and wall to lament. Verse 18, their heart cried out to the Lord, O wall of the daughter of Zion, let your tears run down like a river day and night. Give yourself no relief. Let your eyes have no rest. Wow. He's painting a really difficult picture here. It's pretty intense. And the reality for everything that happens here comes to pass. When we see all of these pictures, in his wrath, he has thrown down, he has brought them down to the ground. He has thrown down without sparing. He has exalted the might of your adversaries. In the streets lie young and old. Your anger you have slaughtered, not sparing. Whew. Those are just a few highlighted verses that tell about what's going on with these folks. And the reality for that is it gives Jeremiah extreme grief. His grief is exposed now. When we get to the 3rd chapter, we start to see how the affliction that has been prophesied, remember, he sees all this in his mind before the people experience it. And that's his whole point of being a prophet. He tries to tell them, this is what's going to happen. And they're going, nah. I'm going to stick my finger in the socket anyhow. And all of a sudden, now they're experiencing the truth of what the prophetic word was. Chapter 3, verse 1. I am the man who has seen affliction because of the rod of his wrath. He's basically saying, I see what's going to happen. You people, I don't know where your head's at, but you're not paying attention. I mean, everything's going to be destroyed. And there's going to be lots of bodies in the street, young and old, men and women. It's going to be a mess. And they're just not paying attention. Jump over here to verse 10, chapter 3. He is to me like a bear lying in wait, like a lion in secret places. He has turned aside my ways and torn me to pieces. He has made me desolate. This is Jerusalem talking to the people about what's going on. This is a picture of being in the midst of pain that the prophet is expressing to the people. This is what the city's going through. I mean, he's just quoting what's going on in the heart and mind of the city, knowing that all of this is not a happy place to be. 3 and 22, the Lord's loving kindness indeed never cease, for his compassions never fail. Where did that come from? Well, they are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. We know these words because they come to us direct from the Lord. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I have hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the person who seeks him. It is good that he waits silently for the salvation of the Lord. When we think about how it's possible for the people to go from such a preferred status to being the total opposite of what God had desired for their lives to be. It would be like, we're shopping. Yesterday I was at Acme in North Canton, and the line was kind of long, and this fella came up behind me, and he had like 3 things in his basket. And I said, go ahead, go ahead here, because I had like 2 weeks worth of groceries. So he goes ahead of me, and the cashier ran out of cash. Money, physical money. And the guy only had cash. He didn't have a credit card. So the poor cashier, young man, I felt bad for him. He's like ringing his buzzer for the manager to come over. And finally the cashier next to him said, what's going on? He says, I don't have any money. I'm out. And all he had in his drawer was change. All of his bills were gone because he was trying to count out the guy's change. Well, that's Jerusalem. They got to the point where there was nothing left. And Jeremiah's crying for the manager. You got to help us here, And finally the manager comes over. True story. The manager comes over with this stack of money, like yay, and sets it on the place where you pack the groceries. And I'm thinking, that's not very smart, because it's a busy place. And this young man is going in circles, and there's this stack of money. It ended up being $200 because he had to count it into his drawer. But everything stopped because they ran out of money. In Jerusalem, everything stopped because the people ran out of faith in God. No more. Somebody could have silently walked by and had $200 in their pocket. And they could have paid cash for their groceries with their money, with Acme's money. But in the case of Jerusalem, all they had to do was take a breath, pause. Life would be good. We'd get back to worshiping Yahweh. It would be the opportunity for them to say that, Yeshua HaMashiach, the Lord is salvation for us all. They could have done that and life would have been good. They didn't. They just kept going on that same path. Verse 32, chapter 3. For he causes grief, then he will have compassion, according to his abundant loving kindness. For he does not afflict willingly or grieve the sons of men. He wants the people to recognize the fact that, this could all stop in a moment. And they just don't listen. And that gets us to anger phase 2, which basically is the part where the Lord talks about the significance of how bad all this has become. Chapter 4, verse 1. How dark the gold has become, how the pure gold has changed. The precious people of Zion, the precious city on the hill. All of this has been worth its weight in gold at one point in time, and now that gold is worthless. It's fool's gold, would be kind of a translation that we could use there. It's no different than what we would read here. How the pure gold has changed. The sacred stones are poured out at the corner of every street. The precious sons of Zion weighed against the gold, how they are regarded as earthen jars. In other words, what used to be the inhabitants that were as valuable as gold to God now are worth nothing. They're just like clay pots. Yep, unfortunately, that's who we are. The reality is, the daughter of my people has become cruel, like ostriches in the wilderness. And that's an inference to the animal, which if you were familiar with how ostriches act out in the wild, they just hide, bury their head. I don't see, I don't hear. Nothing's important to me, forget it. Yeah. So, verse 4, the tongue of the infant cleaves to the roof of his mouth because of thirst. The people were starving to death. Okay? The people were starving to death. The little one asks for bread, but no one breaks it for them. Those who ate delicacies are desolate in the streets. Those reared in purple. Purple was a fabric of wealth. The rich people wore purple robes and stuff. Okay? Purple. For the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the sin of Sodom. Wow. Remember what happened in Sodom? Zowie. Hellfire and brimstone, which was overthrown in a moment, and no hands were turned toward her. All of these are word pictures that help us to get a sense of exactly how bad things were. Their appearance, meaning the people, blacker than soot. Their skin is shriveled. It has become like wood. They're starving to death, and we've seen pictures of the unfortunate people in nations in Africa or in Haiti where the people refuse to give the kids any food. South America, Brazil, Argentina, the street kids, they're on their own. And as they start to diminish in their physical character, they shrivel up and start to look like wood. That's what he's talking about here. Their skin has become like wood. They pine away, being stricken for lack of the fruits of the field. In other words, stuff. Wheat, corn, barley, grapes. The women boiled their own children. They became food for them because of the destruction of the daughter of my people. Wow, how bad can it get? Well, Jeremiah has hope, and he offers his prayers. Lamentations 5:1. Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Jeremiah pleads to God in his prayer. You know all the things that's going on here, Lord. How do we get out of this? How do we correct this? How do we make it better? Well, sins are often shared, but surely individually felt. I kind of struggled on how to put that into words, but a lot of times, when people like these crazy demonstrations, people just join in because, why are you here? Well, they gave me a sign. Well, but what does the sign say? Well, it says this, but do you believe that? Oh, I don't know what it means, but I'm here. Well, sins are often shared, but they're individually felt. That person may end up in jail. You never know. Bad things can happen to people that turn bad. It's a reality for all the things that happen in life. When we do some things bad, they often carry over to someone else. But guess what? The Lord has no favorites. The Lord has no favorites. Sin is sin. Doesn't matter who you are, what you are, race, color, ethnicity, origin, doesn't matter. Sin is sin. God has no favorites. And we can't put the blame on God for the results. And that's something a lot of people want to do, right? God, why did you do this to me? I was only kidding. Well, no do-overs. I'm sorry. Once the sin is cast, the sin is cast. Forgiveness, however, is a whole other thing. Sinners with God, all things are possible, even forgiveness. That's the reality of our lives. And the writer of Lamentations is painting a picture about a future time where everyone can be forgiven. And we read part of that already. So we're going to read this together to help us conclude this. Book, chapter, verses. Okay, you ready? Lamentations 3, 22b, 23a, and 32. For his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. For if he causes grief, then he will have compassion according to his abundant loving kindness. His abundant loving kindness. God can never be outgiven. But what He can do is allow us to be in a place where our hope is secure in Christ. Amen? Amen.